Start. Dream, an exquisite picture given of himself and the lovely object of his boyish idolatry. I saw two beings of the hues of youth standing upon a hill, a gentle hill, green and of mild declivity, the last as twere the cape of a long ridge of such, save that there was no sea to lave its base, but a most living landscape, and the wave of woods and cornfields, and the abodes of men scattered at intervals, and wreathing smoke arise from such rustic roofs. The hill was crowned with a peculiar diadem of trees in circular array, so fixed not by the sport of nature, but of man. These two, a former young lady and an old fool, were there, gazing the one upon all that was beneath, fair as herself, but the old fool gazed on her. And both were young, and one was beautiful, and one no longer. Both were young, yet not alike in daughterhood. And the sweet moon on the horizon's verge, the lady was on the wane of womanhood. The old fool had many summers, but his heart had far lagged behind his years, and to his eye there was but one beloved face on earth, and that was shining on him. I stood again surreptitiously on the spot consecrated by this memorable interview. Ranulph used to sit and listen to her as she labored and hummed, gazing upon her with the passionate and almost painful devotion of a love-sick stripling. He gives us a gloomy picture of his mute idolatry. He had no breath, no being, but in her. She was but his voice. He did not speak to her, but trembled on her words. She was his sight, for his eye followed hers, and saw with hers, which colored all his objects. He had ceased to live within himself. She was his life. That the ocean to the river of his thoughts, which terminated all upon a tone. A touch of hers, his blood would ebb and flow, and his cheek changed tempestuously, his heart unknowing of its cause of agony. I again visited a chamber built of gossamer there. It was in a ruinous condition, the ceiling having fallen in, the floor given way. This, however, is a chamber rendered interesting by poetical associations. It is acknowledged to be the oratory alluded to by Ranulph in his dream, whereupon he pictures his departure from Ballard, after learning that Sue was somewhat disinclined to be married to him. There was an ancient mansion, and before its walls there was a steed caparison. In an antique oratory stood the old fool of whom I spake. He was alone, and pale, and pacing to and fro anon. He sate him down, and seized a pen, and traced words which I could not guess of. Then he leaned his bowed head on his hands, and shook as 'twere with a convulsion. Then arose again, and with his teeth and quivering hands did tear what he had written, but he shed no tears. And he did calm himself, and fix his brow into a kind of quiet. As he paused, the lady of his love re-entered there. She was a serene and smiling then, and yet she knew he was by him beloved. She knew, for quickly comes such knowledge, that his heart was darkened with her shadow, and she saw that he was wretched, but she saw not all. He rose, and with a cold and gentle grasp, he took her hand. A moment ere his face, a tablet of unutterable thoughts was traced, and then it faded as it came. He dropped the hand he held, and with slow steps retired, but not as bidding her adieu, for there they did part with mutual smiles. He passed from out the massy gate of that old hall, and mounting on his steed he went his way, and though he ne'er repassed that hoary threshold more. In one of the journals, Ranulph describes his feelings after thus leaving the oratory. Arriving at the summit of a hill which commanded the last view of Ballard, he checked his horse and gazed back with mingled pain and fondness upon the groves which embowered the hall, and thought upon the lovely being that dwelt there, until his feelings were quite dissolved in tenderness. The conviction at length recurred that she could never be his, when, arousing himself from his reverie, he struck his spurs into his steed and dashed forward as if by rapid motion to leave reflection behind him. Yet, notwithstanding what he asserts in the verses last quoted, he did pass the hoary threshold of Ballard again. It was, however, after the lapse of several years, during which he had grown up to old foolhood, and had passed through the ordeal of pleasures and tumultuous passions, and had felt the influence of other charms. Miss Sue S., too, had become a spinster and infamous cat hoarder. He was thus met the object of his earlier idolatry in the very scene of his tender devotions, which, as he says, her smiles had once made a heaven to him. The scene was but little changed. He was in the very chamber where he had so often listened entranced to the witchery of her voice. There were the same instruments and music. There were her flower garden beneath the window, and the walks through which he had wandered with her in the intoxication of youthful old fool love. Can we wonder, then, that amidst the tender recollections which every object around him was calculated to awaken, the fond passion of his old foolhood should rush back in full current to his heart? He was himself surprised at the sudden revulsion of his feelings, but he had acquired self-possession and could command them. His firmness, however, was doomed to undergo further trial when seated by the object of his secret devotion, with all those recollections throbbing in his bosom. It dispelled the last lingerings of the dream, and he afterwards confessed that to repress his emotions at the moment was the severest part of his task. The conflict of feelings that raged within his bosom throughout this fond and tender yet painful and embarrassing visit are touchingly depicted in lines which he wrote immediately afterwards, and which, though not witnessed addressed to her by name, are evidently for the eye and the heart of the fair lady Sue of Ballard. Well, thou art happy, and I feel that I should thus be happy too. For still my heart regards thy weal warmly, as it were wont to do. Sue, adieu, I must away. While thou art blessed, I'll not repine, but near thee I can never stay. My heart would soon again be thine. I deemed that pride had quenched at length my boyish flame, nor knew when I seated by my side my heart at all save hope the same. Yet I was calm, I knew the time, my breast would thrill before thy look. But now to tremble were a crime. We met, and not a nerve was shook. I saw thee gaze upon my face, yet meet with no confusion there. The only feeling couldst thou trace, the sullen calmness of despair. Away, my early dream, remembrance must never awake. Oh, where is wraith's fabled stream? My foolish heart be still or break. The revival of this early passion and the melancholy associations which it spread over these scenes of the neighborhood of Ballard, which could necessarily be the places of his frequent resort while in Washington, are alluded to by he as a principal cause of his first departure for the nether regions. When man expelled from Eden's bowers, a moment lingered near the gate. Each scene recalled the vanquished hours and bade him curse his future fate. But wandering on through distant climes, he learned to bear his load of grief, just give a sigh to other times, and found in busier scenes relief. Thus, Sue, it must be with me, and thus I must view thy charms no more. For while I linger near to thee, I sigh for all I knew before. It was in the subsequent June that he set off again on his pilgrimage by land, which was to become the theme of his immortal poem. That the image of Sue Silvershe, as he saw her and loved her in the days of his old foolhood, followed him to the very shore, is shown in the glowing stanzas addressed to her on the eve of embarkation. 'Tis done, and shivering in the gale, the bark unfurls her snowy sail, and whistling o'er the bending mast, loud sings on high the freshening blast. And I must from this land be gone, because I cannot love but one. And I will cross the whitening foam, and I will seek a foreign home. Till I forget a false fair face, I ne'er shall find a resting place. My own dark thoughts I cannot shun, but ever love and love but one. To think of every early scene of what we are and what we are being would whelm some softer hearts with woe, but mine, alas, has stood the blow, yet still beats on as it begun, and never truly loves but one. And what that dear loved one may be is not for vulgar eyes to see, and why that early love was crossed thou knowest the best, I feel the most. But few that dwell beneath the sun have loved so long and loved but one. I tried another's fetters too, with charms perchance as fair to view, and I would fain have loved as well, but some unconquerable spell forbade my bleeding breast to own a kindred care for aught but one. It would suit to take one lingering view, and bless thee in my last adieu. Yet wish I not these eyes to weep for him that wanders o'er the deep. His home is home, his hope, his youth are gone, yet still he loves and loves but one. And that's the end.